Thank you so much, Andrew, and welcome everyone. It's a bit strange not to be able to see you, but well, hopefully we'll interact a bit with the Q&A. So my name is Elise Wasmet. I'm a lecturer here in philosophy at the University of Essex. I joined Essex in 2017, and before coming to Essex, I worked for a year at Oxford, and before that I was doing my PhD at the University of Cambridge, where I wrote a dissertation on self-knowledge in Plato's philosophy. So from that, you can probably gather that my main kind of area of research is ancient philosophy and Plato in particular. But I have wider interests as well. So I do a bit of work on ethics and epistemology, and more as well. I do some work on environmental philosophy and the ethics and politics of environmental and climate activism. And there's quite a lot of interest in that in the department. So we're actually setting up a new MA program now in environment, culture and society. So if you're interested in environmental philosophy as well, Essex is a great place to be. But as I said, my main area of research is ancient philosophy, and that will be my focus in this webinar. And I'll speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. I should also say that I just got a dog before the lockdown, and he is a shelter dog, and he can sometimes bark quite a bit, so it might get interrupted. And if so, please just ask questions, or maybe questions to Andrew if I have to leave for a bit. So apologize for that. He's sleeping at the moment, so hopefully it will be fine. Okay, so let's start. So ancient philosophy stretches over a huge period from around 600 BC till around 500 after Christ. So it's a period of around 900 years. So that would be the same period as from the 1100s till today. So it's a huge time period. So obviously we won't be able to cover or look at everything in the seminar today. And it's also an area of philosophy that spans a huge range of topics. So anything from theory of art, ethics, political philosophy, to the theory of knowledge, or epistemology as we call it, metaphysics, and medicine. And indeed, it could be, given the topic of today's webinar, it could have been interesting to have a look at ancient medicine. There's a lot of, they were familiar with plagues and contagious diseases also in ancient times, but I'm not sure that we should really take much of the advice of ancient medical doctors. Some of them are a bit nauseating, and I'm not sure they would be very efficient either. But if you're interested, that's a huge area of research that is really interesting. But today, instead, I'll focus on, so to kind of hone in and limit what we'll look at, I'll focus on these Hellenistic schools here, which kind of arose in the time period after Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Here you see Socrates, here you see Plato, and here you see Aristotle, who are kind of maybe the most famous kind of ancient philosophers. The Hellenistic schools kind of arose after Aristotle's death, and they were rival schools. So we'll look at the Stoics, the Epicureans, and the Skeptics. And these were rival philosophical schools. You could kind of join them and kind of be a card-carrying Stoic, Epicurean, and Skeptics, and they were constantly kind of fighting, having philosophical battles between them. And part of why I want to have a look at these philosophical schools in particular is because they all claim that we would actually be perfectly able to live the best possible life, or perfectly happy lives, even in a state of lockdown. So I thought it would be interesting to look at them and see why they think a lockdown is a perfectly good time to live perfectly happy lives. So we'll start with the Epicureans, which are named after the kind of founder of the school, Epicurus, who you can see here, who lived at the late 4th century, or last half of the 4th century and the beginning of the 3rd century. And he's kind of the founding father of the Epicurean school. And you might be puzzled if you you've heard anything about the Epicureans or Epicurean philosophy, you might be puzzled that they should be included on this list of philosophers who think we can live happily in lockdown, because aren't they hedonists? Aren't they advocates of the life of pleasure? And how can a state of lockdown be compatible with a life of pleasure, given that everything is running scarce, you know, people are stockpiling, we can't have pasta, we can't find chocolate in the aisles. How can we live a perfectly pleasant life in lockdown? And indeed, you are right. The Epicureans were hedonists, and hedonists think that pleasure is the good, and the life of pleasure is the good life. So the best life, indeed, is the life with the most pleasure. And they have an argument for this claim that pleasure is the good that I'll just outline very, very briefly. And it's called the cradle argument. And they ask us to look at the cradle, where you find newborn animals and newborn babies, and you look at their behavior. And the Epicureans say, if you look at the behavior of newborn humans in the cradle, you see that what they do is that they seek pleasure and they avoid pain. And this shows us that what's natural for us to do, what's good for us to do, is to avoid pain and pursue pleasure. So the pleasure is the good according to nature, and pain is evil according to nature. So that's kind of, in brief, very briefly, the kind of cradle argument of the Epicureans. So how do the Epicureans maintain that we can live a perfectly pleasant life, indeed the most pleasurable life, in a state of lockdown? How can that be? Given, as I said, that we lack pasta, we might not be able to get our favorite chocolate or do our kind of things that we usually think are pleasant. And this is because they have a very specific theory about what the most pleasant life is. So they argue that the most pleasant life is the life where you have no unfulfilled desires. So the highest pleasure is the freedom from unfulfilled desires. So you lack nothing. You have no unfulfilled need or lack or something that you desire. You're in a state of kind of total fulfillment. And why is that? Because having an unfulfilled desire is painful. Lacking something is painful. So pleasure is just freedom from all this kind of pain. And if we define pleasure as just the freedom of this kind of pain, the freedom from any kind of unfulfilled desires, we see that there are really two ways which you can fulfill this, get to this state. You either keep kind of chasing every desire and fulfill every desire you get immediately. And that's a really tiring life, the Epicureans would say. So say you desire chocolate, you go out and get chocolate, but you desire more chocolate, so you have to work to get money to buy this, or you desire all these fancy cars and you have to get rich in order to get them. It can be really exhausting to try and fulfill every desire you have if your desire are these kind of widespread. So that's going to be a really tiring life and not really a pleasant life at all. So the other way of ensuring that you don't have any unfulfilled desires is to limit the kind of desires that you have. So make sure that you don't have any desires that can't be easily satisfied. You only have desires that are easily satisfied. Because if you only have very basic desires, then you would be content with very little. So Epicurus famously said that he would be content with just bread and cheese. You wouldn't even need pasta, so you wouldn't worry about it running out in the stores. And then you could live a life free of any unsatisfied desires. So that's the kind of basic advice of the Epicureans. Try to kind of accustom yourself and only have these basic desires, because then you will live the most pleasant life, even if you can only have bread and cheese or bread and water. And the reason I put this picture of the jar on the slide is because that's how they compare the person who's just chasing after all the kinds of desire. They would they would just have to keep filling up with pleasures in an unlimitless way. So that's the kind of the life you don't want to live. So that's the kind of the main advice from the Epicureans. Limit your desires, make sure you're content with little. But the Epicureans also have some advice, a lot of advice really, to make us live in a kind of content, tranquil life. And one of the famous one is some advice to help us get rid of fears, and notably the fear of illness and the fear of death. So they have lots of advice about how to get rid of the fear of death and the fear of illness. And if you're interested, you can ask about that in the Q&A. They also put a lot of store on friendship. So friendship is really important for them. And they kind of recognize that being away from friends can be painful. So if you should write letters, and you should think about the good times you had and kind of think about the memories, good memories you have. And that's a way of kind of keeping your friendship and the pleasure of friendship alive, even if you're apart. So they have some advice broader than on pleasure that is helpful in lockdown. But because we don't have much time, let's move on to the skeptics, because the skeptics too have some good advice on how to deal with the stress and worries of lockdown. So for the skeptics too, the good life is the life that is free from any kind of worries or trouble, which they call the life of ataraxia or tranquility. So this is the life where you have nothing worrying you, no disturbances, and you're completely tranquil. So it's similar to what the Epicureans advocated. But the way to get there is different from this for the skeptics. The key to getting rid of all your worries and live like Baloo, according to the skeptics, is to realize that all your worries build on beliefs that you have, but that you shouldn't have. So you have all these beliefs that cause you worry, but in fact, you have good reason to get rid of these beliefs. And in fact, they say you should reject all your beliefs because you don't have any firm ground to hold any of them. And then once you let go of your beliefs, you will stop worrying. So for instance, now in lockdown, you might be worrying about when you can travel and go on your next holiday. And that depends on a belief that going on holidays and traveling is a good thing. But in fact, if you just get rid of that belief that traveling is a good thing, then you wouldn't worry about not being able to travel. So you might kind of think that this is not very plausible. You have lots of good reasons for thinking that traveling is good, or indeed to hold any other belief you have. You have lots of good reasons. So the skeptics realize that this is a common way to think. So they have lots of exercises that they've come up with to help you realize that you should in fact get rid of your beliefs. And these are called the skeptical, so this is the main claim, let go of your beliefs. And these are called the modes. So the skeptical modes are these kind of exercises that will help you realize that you don't have any reasons to hold your beliefs. And I'll just mention three examples of these modes. So the first is dispute. So taking the example of going traveling, so you might think traveling is a good thing, but then you should remember, and this is the mode of dispute, you should remember that there are people who disagree with you. Some people think traveling is a bad thing, or they don't like traveling. So there are people who have a different view to you. That suggests that your view is not the only one that is possible to have. And so it suggests that it might not be true at all. And since it might not be true at all, you should just give it up. So that's the first mode. Remembering that your belief is open to dispute. There are people that disagree with you. The second mode is infinite regress. So imagine someone asking you, well, why do you want to go travel? And you say, well, I don't know, it's because I want to see new places. And then they keep asking, well, why do you want to see new places? And you say, oh, because that makes me appreciate home more. And they ask you, well, why do you want to do that? And someone who asks you why, forever, and you realize that you wouldn't be able to escape that row of questions. There would always be possible to ask you another question. Well, why do you think that? Why do you think that? And so that means that you don't have any firm ground for your belief. You could always ask why again. And since you don't have any firm ground for your belief, you should give it up because it's not well founded. So that's the second one. The third one I want to mention is relativity. And the mode of relativity is just asks you to realize that your view is based on a very particular perspective. So it's based on the kind of person you are, the kind of situation you're in, the kind of time you're in, and the kind of things that you have access to. So you might realize that from another perspective, your opinions might seem different, or things might seem different. So you might think traveling is a good thing, but then from the perspective of someone who is, well, in a state that we're in now, for instance, where there is a virus on the loose, traveling is not a good thing because it opens up for risk. So realizing that your views are always situated and you have them from a specific perspective and things might look different from another perspective should also make you realize that the beliefs you have are not universally true. And that should make you give them up because you know that they're not, you don't know that they're true. So once you go through all these modes, and there are 10 in total, so there are 7 more that I haven't mentioned, and the skeptics think that if you go through these modes, you'll realize that you should let go of all your beliefs. And once you do that, tranquility, ataraxia arises. So trouble comes from committing yourself to things, like traveling is good. So it's best to just let it go. Let go of your beliefs, and you'll live a tranquil, happy life. You might think that this is a bit extreme, and indeed there are lots of questions to ask about the skeptics. Well, how can they live at all if they don't have any beliefs? So feel free to ask about that in the Q&A if you have any questions. But I want to also get to the Stoics before we end. So I'm sure you heard of the Stoics. They're super popular now. A lot of people, especially in places like Silicon Valley, claim to be inspired by Stoicism at the moment. Here's an example: Tim Ferriss, who proclaims that he is using ancient Stoic mechanisms to deal with the stress of losing lots of money during COVID. I'm not going to make any judgment about whether these people are really Stoics or not, but in order to really understand Stoicism, we have to go back to or Stoic ethics, we have to go back to their kind of fundamental ethical principle, and that's the following: that virtue is the only good. So virtue is the only thing that is really good in the world. And they have an argument for this, and well, they have several arguments for this, but one is that think about everything else that you might consider good. So you might think that health is a good thing, money is a good thing, beauty is a good thing, power is a good thing, freedom, money. You might think that these are good things. But think about that, and you realize that these things are not always good. In fact, the Stoics would point out that these things are only good if you are virtuous. So think about money, for instance. Money is only good if you spend it well, if you're virtuous. It is not good if you spend your money on harmful things, things that are bad for you. And health, they would say, is only good if you live well. Health is not good if you're miserable, then it will just prolong your miserable life. So all these other things that you might think are good are in fact not always good. They are what the Stoics would call indifference. They're sometimes good, sometimes bad, and so they're neither really good nor bad. Only virtue is good. And that means that since virtue is the only good, virtue is all you need to be happy. So as long as you're virtuous, you have everything that is good, and so you're happy. So you only need virtue to be happy. So this seems like a perfect lockdown philosophy. As long as you keep virtuous, you'll be happy, even in lockdown. You don't need all these external things like pasta or traveling in order to be happy. The only thing you need is virtue. And indeed, the Stoics would argue famously that you would even be happy in slavery or under torture as long as you kept your own virtue, as long as your soul was virtuous. But we can still ask this question, well, what are we supposed to do when we're virtuous? And the Stoics famously say that virtue is living according to nature. It is fulfilling our proper function, the kathekon, according to the Stoics. So living virtuously is living according to nature and fulfilling our proper function. And what exactly this means is a huge question. And you might think that, so we won't have time to go into it in detail, but you might think that, well, in lockdown, I'm not able to live in accordance with nature. There are lots of natural things that I'm not able to do in lockdown. How can the Stoics say that I'm perfectly able to live happily in lockdown if they think that we should live according to nature? But this, of course, depends on what you think our nature is and what our proper function is to do. And the Stoics, as well as most ancient philosophers, in fact, would stress that we're not just animals, we are rational animals. Our nature is to be rational beings, to use reason, to have an intellect. So according to the Stoics, the good life is a life of reasoning, a life of philosophy. So what we should really do during lockdown, sorry, that was supposed to be about the argument for why virtue is living according to nature, but I don't think we'll have time for it, but we can go into it in the Q&A if you're interested. So the kind of the main upshot of the Stoics is that we should do philosophy. So spend lockdown doing philosophy, and so the Stoics would definitely encourage you to tune in to the rest of the philosophy webinars that are coming up over the next few weeks, and to come and study philosophy at Essex. Indeed, that's the best life you could possibly live, and you can perfectly well live that life of philosophy in lockdown. So I'll end there because it's been 20 minutes, but we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. And if you want to know why there's a picture of Bambi on the slide, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Elisif. That was really interesting. So what we'll do, yeah, we'll give you guys a few seconds to respond to any questions you have, any comments, anything like that. Can I be the first to ask why there's Bambi on the screen?
Yes, good. Yeah, thank you, Andrew. So I was going to say something about why the Stoics think that virtue is living according to nature. And in fact, they have an argument for this. And their argument is quite funny because it's an explicit slap at the Epicureans. So you remember that the Epicureans had this cradle argument that we should look at what newborn babies and newborn animals do once they're born. And the Epicureans said, well, these newborns, they seek pleasure and avoid pain. The Stoics say, no, that's not what they do. If you really look at the cradle, what happens in the cradle, you see that they try to do what is good for them, what is good for their nature, what is proper to their nature. And they try to do that even if that's painful. So they give this example of an animal like Bambi trying to stand up. You know, they will try to stand up because that's what's natural for them. That's what's good for them. That's their proper function. It's kind of self-preservation. And they're trying to do that even if it's painful. So it's painful, they fall down again, and their legs are hurting, but they still do it. So that shows that pain is not the evil. Kind of doing something contrary to nature is what's evil, because the animals do this despite it being painful. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Are there any other questions? And remember, you can ask questions about philosophy at Essex or coming to Essex, and everything. Everything.
Anything and everything. Yeah, we'll give you guys just a few seconds for the questions to come in. What I'll do, guys, just while we're waiting for some questions, I'll just let you guys know about our other upcoming webinars. So the same way you guys joined on this link, we do have other philosophy or other subject areas. So if you guys are interested in attending, you join them the same way you've joined through this one. So you just go onto our webpage and then you're able to access those kind of different topic areas as well. The next one for philosophy, I'll quickly get up so you guys can find that out as well. So I'll give you a second.
It looks like we have a question from Martina.
You want to pick that one up?
Sure. So the question is whether you can study philosophy together with English or other subjects. And yes, you can absolutely do that. We have joint degrees. So yes, I guess is the short answer to that. And that means that you will do usually a 50-50 split, but there is still quite a lot of choice in how you want to mix your philosophy modules with your English modules. There are some core modules that everyone has to take. So you'll have to take certain philosophy modules and certain English modules, for instance, but there's also quite a lot of choice. And I think it's at the end of your first year, if you change your mind and you think, I just want to do English, or I just want to do philosophy, you can still swap courses after your first year, as long as you've taken all those compulsory modules.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else you want to add, Andrew?
No, that's perfect. Yeah, joint honours degrees. I did a joint honours degree myself because when I was looking at university, there wasn't really like one specific subject area I wanted to focus on. So it's great if you are interested in obviously philosophy and English and you want to combine it. because it certainly does like open up those opportunities to potential jobs or researching, depending wherever you want to go. And especially philosophy and English can be very interlinked at times. Cool, Martina, no problem. You seen the question from Jess, Alyssa?
Let me just see. On Stoics on pain, yeah, I think so. I'm not sure I understood the question. So if you want to elaborate a bit on the question, but I'll just say a bit about the Stoics on pain. So I think the key to kind of, so if the question is how do you deal with pain if you're a Stoic, and famously, the Stoics are the kind of prime examples of the stiff upper lip people, right, who don't let anything faze them. And I think the key to dealing with pain for the Stoics is to realize that pain is not an evil. So the only thing that is evil is the lack of virtue, is being a bad person. So vice is the only evil, just like virtue is the only good. And once you realize that, you realize that being in pain isn't really bad for you. The only thing that is bad for you is being a bad person. And pain won't affect whether you're a good person or bad person. So once you realize that, it will help you kind of deal with the pain. You realize it's not really that bad for you. It's not really bad for you at all, in fact. That doesn't mean that it's not pleasant. And they have this theory. So you might think, well, if you remember, I said that things that aren't virtue and vice are indifferent. So they're neither good nor bad. But you might think that, well, I still prefer pleasure over pain. And the Stoics would completely agree with that. So they call these things like pleasure and money and health, they call them preferred indifference. So it means that they're not really good. They're not good, but still, if everything else remains neutral, you can still prefer them. So you prefer, all things being equal, you prefer pleasure over pain, money over poverty, but you shouldn't confuse them being preferable in most situations to being really good. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, just added another point, just saying, sorry, she has MS and often are called Stoic as I don't share my pain.
Yes, I think there are lots of confusions about what Stoicism is, and a lot of people think, Stoicism is all about suppressing your emotions, or kind of just dealing with everything life throws at you. And it's a much more sophisticated theory than that. They have some strange views on emotions too, a bit like the skeptics. They think that our emotions are really responses to beliefs. So as long as you deal with the underlying belief, you can then, that will help you respond well to whatever situation, and kind of not have these irrational emotional responses. So just like with pain, once you realize that pain isn't really bad for you, so you rectify your belief about pain, then your emotional response will be similar. But it's not a kind of just endure whatever life throws at you kind of philosophy, like it's sometimes simplified as.
Cool, thanks. There's a question from Carl as well. Are you able to see that, or do you want me to read it out?
Oh yeah. Yeah, do you want to read it out?
Yeah. So Carl was just saying, I can see that living by nature is virtuous, but surely this isn't a definition. For example, a lawyer fighting for human rights and to end suffering would be living in a virtuous life, but would not be living by nature.
Good. Okay, so that's a really good question. And it brings me to another kind of point of Stoicism. So they kind of, the general account is that living by nature is living virtuously, but they also recognize that people have slightly different natures. So they have a theory of the different persona, where they kind of mention that the kind of life that is good for you might differ from the kind of life that is fit for someone who is different. So just like they say, actors on a stage, for some actors certain roles are appropriate. If you're really tall, I don't know how to say. Okay, if you have a certain physique, maybe some roles will suit you better. Whereas if you have another kind of demeanor, other roles will suit you better. Sometimes some people are just born to act like the clown. Some people look like a murderer and they should have the murderer's roles or something like that. So just like actors should have different roles depending on what they're like, they say human beings will have different things that are appropriate for them to do depending on their character. So not just their character, but also what roles they're born into. So if you're kind of born into a royal family, it will be appropriate for you to take on that role if your nature is otherwise fit for it. Whereas, you know, someone who is not born into that role shouldn't act like a king. So it's perfectly fine for someone to have the nature of a lawyer, maybe they have great intellect, they have a good sense of justice, you know, and that would be the life according to nature for them. And not everyone can do philosophy, even though that's the best life. So they still have this theory that, you know, if you do philosophy and you really reach wisdom, that's the only happy life. That's the life of the sage, and that's the only good person. And everyone else, the rest of us, we're not good people. I mean, sorry, we just haven't cut it. So it's a very kind of black and white picture of what is a good life. And most of us, because we're not wise, we haven't attained that really high level of wisdom that they demand for the truly happy life. We're just, we're not really happy. And they compare it to drowning. So just like they say, you know, it doesn't matter how close you are to the surface of the water. You know, if you're 100 meters deep or you just a centimeters deep, you'll still drown if you're underwater. And the same they say about virtue. So it doesn't matter how close you are to virtue and wisdom, because you're only fully virtuous if you're completely wise. It doesn't matter how close you are to wisdom. If you're still lacking in wisdom, you're not going to be virtuous and happy. So it's a kind of complex picture where they say the good life can depend on your character, but still the best life, the only really good life is the life of wisdom and virtue. I don't know if that was a bit all over, but I hope that answered.
Thank you. You just come back saying, so being Stoic is really being true to yourself.
Yes, yeah. Yes, to your kind of true nature, your true human nature.
Perfect. And just one final question in coming from Martina. How do Stoics work out that something is virtuous?
It comes back to this idea of wisdom. So you really have to pursue a life of philosophy, look at what's natural, what is natural, what's nature, and I guess you could only really answer that question if you were a sage, if you were fully wise, and I'm not. So it's a kind of constant work in progress to try to figure out what exactly is according to nature and what is good for us. Yes, but that's the kind of main criteria, that it is according to nature and in accordance with the kind of world order, the cosmos as a whole. So the idea is that we as human beings are rational and we're part of this rational cosmos. And being kind of fitting seamlessly into that is the life according to nature and the good life for us.
Cool, perfect. Thank you so much for that, Elizabeth. That was really interesting and definitely thought-provoking. Was there any final points or comments you wanted to add with like further reading, anything like that before we draw the webinar to a close?
Yes, so I put some further reading. I don't know if the slides will be available, but I put some, they're not really, well, only reading their internet sources. So the first one here is a podcast series by Professor Peter Adamson, and it's excellent. It takes you through the history of philosophy from kind of early Greek philosophy, and I think he's reached the Renaissance. You get new episodes every week or a couple of weeks, and they're really, really good. So I recommend, you know, if you're interested in hearing more about any of this, do listen to the relevant episode. They're kind of short, 15, 25 minutes each, and you can listen to more about the Stoics or Epicureans or Skeptics or anything else. And then there is also if you're interested in philosophy, you should definitely know about this it's the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and you find it if you just put this bit in, and you can search for any philosophical topic at all, and they're really good, usually really good entries with lots of suggestions for further reading. So I would recommend you to have a look at these two sources, and they both give you suggestions for further reading if you want to explore the topics even more. So those are my kind of 2 tips.
Perfect, thank you.
And we have this as well.
Yeah, so this slide is just again what I was saying with the upcoming other talks. So if you were interested in more philosophy talks, the next one we have is on the 21st of May, which is next Thursday at midday again, so at 12 o'clock British summertime. And it's on the moral limits of markets. So if that's something you're interested in, then definitely please come through. Also on our website, we have an inquiry form. So if you haven't yet applied, or if you want to receive more information from Essex, please just fill in that form and we'll be able to keep you up to date with more information as well. So thank you so much everyone for tuning in, and thank you so much Elisa for hosting this. It was definitely really interesting. Thank you everyone. So I'll draw it to a close. Any final comments?
No, just thank you everyone, and thank you for your questions. They were really good, and I hope to see you at Essex next year.
Perfect. Thank you everyone. Stay safe. Take care. Bye.